myself, and all that kind of stuff. As I can realize, since I graduated from school in 40 and was still too young, it was 1943 before I was inducted into the military. And 1944 in August when I graduated from flying school. In fact, tomorrow it will be exactly 60 years since I completed basic flying training at Macon Field, Cochran Field in Macon, Georgia. But to go back to this, there are a few things that did take place in my military career that are unique enough that I'd like you to know about it, even though it's not exciting and not death-defying or anything like that. I was enlisted as an aviation cadet in May 1943. And would you believe it? In West Los Angeles, California. It so happened that since the cadets had already been through the process, we were stationed along the line to help to process inductees. And would you believe that one of the inductees that came by, whom I was running the scale, weighing and reporting, was Orson Welles. You people don't know Orson Welles, I guess, but he created a sensation in his day with the War of the Worlds and was famous in his area. Now, I can't support the next statement, but since he was here in Hershey not long ago, I'll bring it up. It was reported or rumored that Mickey Rooney was also supposed to be on that draft list, and he didn't show up. And you may well realize that Orson Welles, who was wearing a heavy back brace, never passed the physical. But anyway, from there, let me just get you back into my military experience. After being inducted, we were reported to Biloxi Field, Mississippi for basic training. We went through the old rigmarole, you know, carry the pack, walk the walk, march the march, and so on. After basic training, it was on to Nashville, Tennessee, Classification Center. There they separated a number of us, pilots, navigators, bombardiers, and others, and I was fortunate enough to pass into the pilot category. From there to Maxwell Field, Alabama, to pre-flight training for pilots. And this was similar to what you see in the movies or hear about with the type of thing that goes on at West Point or the Naval Academy. It was strictly military, strictly by the book. Get up in the middle of the night to drum somebody out of the Corps who had been misbehaving, that kind of stuff. From there, because the system was getting filled up with pilots and everything else, there was a delay. We went to Raleigh, North Carolina State College, Turlington Hall, Alexander Hall, for those of you who head that way, and went through college training detachment. And then on to primary training. Douglas, this was a private school in Douglas, Georgia, and we flew PT-17. Now let me show you what kind of an animal that was. You may pass this around. This happens to be my instructor and his students. His name was Schwartz, and I don't know where they got that little short guy with all those big ones, but that was nevertheless primary training in PT-17s, the old two-winger biplane open cockpit, and that was a great time. A lot of things happened there that I won't relate here. From there on to basic training, basic pilot training in Macon, Georgia. All of these fields, by the way, were within 50 miles of each other. And there we went into the 450 horse Vultee basic trainer. We called it the Vultee vibrator because it shook and rattled pretty good, but we had basic training. Then on to Spencefield, Georgia for advanced training in T6s. Now T6s is this kind of an animal. you know, I still have the pilot's manual that tells me how those things operated. You may pass this around if you wish. Next time I'll go back this way, okay? But after graduation in August 44, bear in mind now, D-Day was June 1944. So you see, that part of the war was pretty well advanced. North Africa had already been settled. The battles were going heavily in Italy and so on. And it was in August of 44 when southern France was invaded. I bring this in only that reference where I was and where things were happening that I was not associated with. Anyway, I scored well enough in gunnery school that they sent me to Tyndallfield, Florida, to be a gunnery pilot and instructor. Now, as a gunnery pilot, our job was to make simulated fighter attacks against bombers, the bombers having in it student gunners, and they of course would track us and work on us with camera guns until the last phase of their training. Here's the kind of plane that I flew in that system, a P-63 and an RP-63, and this is what we flew against B-24s. In the last week of training, the students fired live ammunition at us. Now, we flew armor-plated RP-63s, and here's the pilot's manual for P-63. You're not going to fly one of these, but let's see what kind of an animal it was. But, and it flew quite well and all that. We didn't use very many P-63s. In fact, the Army Air Forces didn't use any during the war, but the Russians did with great effect. There were thousands of them went across the United States up to Alaska and on into Russia. And some of our fellows in Florida were detached to help catch up on transfers when the winter weather slowed them up. But I didn't get on one of those trips. So I didn't get out of there until September 1945. You now realize that the war in Japan had just ended in August and September of 45 with the dropping of the bomb on Hiroshima. From there I went to Oklahoma City. While there, I was fortunate enough to be in the hangar one day when nothing but the Enola Gay came through on a routine inspection. Do you people know what the Enola Gay was?
Plane.
It was the plane that dropped the atomic bomb, the first one. Boxcar dropped the second one. Also, then after that, we go up to Kansas City. While in Kansas City, I was helping to close a depot. I was an adjutant to the commander. But President Truman's plane would come in once in a while, and we being in the military serviced it. Here is a picture of his front end of his airplane, which I took when we were out servicing it. It would come in, we would stick it in the hangar so nobody knew where it was or who it was, bring it out of the hangar when he was ready to go, fully serviced, and away they'd go. I never got to see him, but nevertheless it did come and go. After that, I was transferred to Okinawa. Now, Okinawa was a unique place. We didn't have calendars over there, so I thought I'd show you what calendars looked like. The photographic department made calendars, and that's what they looked like. In Okinawa, I was adjutant in an air-sea rescue detachment. I was stationed permanently in the boat detachment, but I flew regular search missions as an extra crew member of the B-17s. We would leave before daylight in the morning, get into the search area at daylight, search all day, and get back at night. I never qualified in a B-17, but I was a single engine jockey, and they didn't think much of us. There's a unique thing that happens when you're flying, among other things, besides being scared. And that is, when you see a rainbow up there, it's a circle. Believe me? There's a picture. I took that picture out of my airplane as we were flying above the clouds, and a rainbow appeared, and of course, the shadow of my airplane's in the center of the rainbow. This is a picture of the boat detachment we were in. We had 20-some boats of various sizes, and we would pick up those who went down at sea. It got pretty rugged once in a while. I know the time we picked up 13 of them in 10 days. So they were going into the water pretty regularly. And after that, of course, I came back. Oh, another thing that was there, you may have heard plenty about the Japanese suicide planes and so on. They had regular airplanes that were loaded with bombs and crashed, but they also had a specially built that they called a Baka bomb. And Tristan, you can be the first to see what a Baka bomb looked like. It was in reality an aerial torpedo with wings attached and the suitable controls, and the pilot would get in it. He'd be taken aloft as a belly load on a bigger plane, generally a Betty bomber, and released somewhere near the target. He would fire the rockets and at high speed blast into the target. His targets were generally Navy because they could do more damage in one place than they could by banging into us. But I might also point out that those Baka bombs had a latched roof or cover, and the latches were on the outside. Once you got inside that thing and they closed it and latched it, you were on your last ride. We also, over there, had escape maps in case somebody would catch us on the loose. They were silk and embroidered, and they would never deteriorate. This happened to be one of the Philippines. You carried those among other things. Now then, I'm going to stop there and let you know that from that point on, I came back to the United States, of course, and was discharged after 4 years, 3 months, and 29 days. I stayed in the reserves of the National Guard since, and today I'm retired as a lieutenant colonel from the unit that is now in Middletown, the 193rd. Some of you may have associates attached to it. With this, I'm going to end my story and ask if anyone has questions of any sort. How about over here? Any questions of anything about that I said or have not said? Okay. Here's another cute little gadget. We didn't treat our prisoners quite like they're treating them in the Middle East today. A prisoner of war, out of gratitude, made this for me. We had 60 prisoners of war working in and around us on a daily basis, and we treated them reasonably well, I think. In fact, much better than you might imagine under the circumstances, because they had been rather treacherous to our troops in the Philippines in years earlier. Since you don't have any questions, I'll show you another little gadget we use. We carry these things. This is a dead reckoning computer. This is only a part of it. Here's the full outfit. I'll take it out of the case and you can pass it around. On the back side, you could do a navigation problem. On the front side, you could do all kinds of arithmetic, that being a circular slide rule. And you see, at those times we didn't have the kind of sophisticated navigation you have today. It was dead reckoning time and distance, and you paid attention to where you were or you got lost type of thing. But we did that. Also, in order to keep track of what we did, we had one of these. Pardon me, if I do this, strapped to our knee, because you see, when we put this thing on, you had a place to write your notes. Computed when you had the batteries in it, a little light that could light up, you could see at night. And flying at night in a fighter plane can be pretty thrilling sometimes. Even so far as to have your own pencil sharpener. clever these Yankees are. But you'd get operating instructions while you're in the air, oftentimes in cryptic code of some sort so that it couldn't be deciphered. And I might point that out, you know, the Japanese language does not have all the nuances that the English language has. So that we use call signs that they couldn't use. For instance, our call sign was yard jump pink. Say it real fast and you're not a Japanese. And we also had fish jelly red, things of this kind. You see, the Japanese cannot pronounce double L's. They cannot pronounce double R's. So we use call signs that they could not duplicate as we transmitted to each other. Anything else here? Now, to give you an idea, much later, I don't happen to have the pilot's carry-on manual that we used with those, but I have one that we had later when I was at Middletown, and this gives you an idea of the flight crew checklist. When we went airborne, and we always carried those, and that's the rigmarole we went through to get an airplane off the ground and back on. We had those in their correct shape and size for every airplane we flew, and you always had to carry them. Anything else here? I will like to throw in a commercial. Since this is a World War II study period, you may or may not be aware that every year, on the first weekend in June, there's a World War II reenactment in Reading. It's combined with an air show. I will leave this brochure with your teacher. She may or may not want to send you down there on a field trip, but there are a lot of famous people that attended. Let me just read who all might be there. How about General Paul Tibbets? You know who he was? He flew the Enola Gay over Hiroshima. Dutch Van Kirk, his navigator. I have his picture and his autograph at home. Robert Morgan, he flew the Memphis Belle. We could keep on going down through here, but it wouldn't matter. This is an interesting thing, and obviously you have only a short time to plan to go. If you do go, I've been there several times, and I've taken trips there with students as well as family. It is, and if you don't make it this year, don't sweat it. It generally is the first weekend in June each year. Only once was it ever delayed, and that was because of some other form of crisis. So I'll leave this with you whenever you want it. It's an interesting thing because in that case, everything is in World War II memorabilia type motif. They all wear the fatigues, the army. There's an artillery battery there. There's a German prisoner of war camp there. There's a medical tent there where they do fake surgery in the days similar to. Anything you can think of. They have a flamethrower demonstration. You can go for a ride in a B-17 if you got the money and the time and the nerve. Our outfit that I was with, the 193rd, is generally there with one of their J model 130s. It's an interesting World War II collection of all kinds. Anything else? No question. You mean to tell me I'm sorry, say again?
Did he keep in touch with anyone from World War II?
Oh yes, quite a few. In fact, you see my hat, 148th Fighter Squadron Association. That also is part of history. The 148th Fighter Squadron was the first fully American fighter squadron to fight in France in World War I. Up until the 148th was initiated, all Americans that fought in World War I in the air were attached to either the British or the French escadrilles and fought as part of those squadrons. When there were sufficient Americans there to justify it, they formed a squadron which was 148th, which is why we carry that designation. We, by the way, having been also the first National Guard squadron to have been commissioned after World War II at Reading. Now General Posey, then Major Posey, did it, and it started in 1947. You can see shortly right after the war ended. And I know General Posey personally. He's a real nice guy. But back to the question, yes, we keep an association. It so happens that I was younger than most, so I outlasted most, but there are quite a number of those with whom I flew and was associated have taken their last flight. Anyone else?
Can you share with us, you said you had 5 brothers. I think we didn't get that on camera. Do you want to share that part of your story with us?
Well, thank you. Yes, when I was in the service, there were 4 brothers and myself, total of 5, in the service at one time. My brother Lester was in New Guinea and the Philippines. In fact, he went over in January 1942 on the Queen Mary, unescorted, because at that time those things didn't happen yet. Landed in Australia, went to Port Moresby in New Guinea and fought the way up through. He was an armorer and gunner on a B-17 squadron. That was my second brother. My oldest brother, Warren, was in Alaska. We had been working at Douglas Aircraft Factory, so obviously he was acquainted with aircraft sheet metal maintenance. He wound up in that job in Alaska, and he was there a couple of years. My brother Charles Jr., a puppy, those of you who are from Halifax know a pup. If you don't, well, you don't really belong in Halifax. But nevertheless, he was in the 9th Armored Division in Europe, and sometimes I think he stretches a little when he tells me these things, because it was pretty rugged. But it so happened, if you believe him, and I will in this case, he was captured and escaped twice in the same day. It happened like this. They were in tank retrieving at the battlefront during the Battle of the Bulge when the Germans overran them. And naturally they were caught flat-footed and captured. As the Germans kept advancing, they ran into a little bit of American resistance. In the firefight, he escaped along with his buddies. But in no time at all, a much larger group of Germans advanced, recaptured them, and recaptured the outposts and all, and drove further. Then they hit the main line of resistance, and a big battle ensued, and they all escaped the end. Some of them got hurt in the process, but they all survived. And then my brother Harvey, who he was in the Navy on a tanker in the Pacific Theater, and of course I, as I just related, was in the States and then over into Okinawa. Okinawa, whether you realize it or not, was the longest continuous battle of the war, 86 days. It began on Easter Sunday in 1945 and lasted until July the 26th. And it is where General Buckner was killed 2 miles from the front with a stray shell. We were in the river, Bishagawa. Bisha is a word for river, and the Gawa. And it was where we kept our boats and patrolled the western part of the Pacific. And more than once we'd get out there when it was as calm as a pond or as rough as you ever want to be at sea. I know in the time the sea was that rough, with 2 650 horsepower engines, we couldn't climb the waves. They were at least 30 feet high. It was pretty rugged. We were always sure we were going to get back, but we did. But our job was patrolling whenever there was a mission on to pick up whoever didn't make it the whole way back. And it would be pretty regular. There is one case, interesting. Okinawa is like those volcanic islands, have very steep banks at some places, cliffs railing, and other places very shallow, even sandy beaches. On Cadena Airstrip, the cliff is 300 feet high. And there's a B-24 came in about 20 feet too low. The imprint was on that face of that cliff when I left. 4 inches in the nose and a bunch of debris and fell. Also, I was out at that same point picking up people once in a while, and with 900 feet of anchor line out, we couldn't touch bottom, and we weren't any further from shore than from here to Center Street. So it's straight up. I also might mention while I was in Okinawa, in this rescue business, we flew ambulance planes. That was part of our business of picking up strays and all. And I flew to Aishima several times. In fact, one night the guards got to shooting at each other over there, and another fellow and I made 11 trips back and forth, bringing the wounded from Aishima to Okinawa to the base hospital. Aishima is also the place where Ernie Pyle was killed. He's been recognized by many as having been the greatest war correspondent of the time. His columns were in like 150 newspapers. There are several who have said there was no greater reporter. He reported both in Italy, France, and over in the Pacific, and was killed in Aishima. Somewhere in my paraphernalia, but I couldn't find it when I wanted it, I have a picture of the site where he was killed. There was a monument placed there, and it says on this site, in so-and-so day, Ernie Pyle was killed by machine gun fire. It so happened that they dived into a ditch, and he stuck his head up to look around, and that was the end of Ernie Pyle. He has written several books. If you ever want to read how it was at the dog-faced level, read one of these books. Some of his most graphic deals with a captain who his troops cried when they brought his body down off the mountain in Italy. So that war is a combination of terror, tough life, funny incidents at times, and anything you can describe. It's a full segment of everything. Any questions? You must have some questions. You're looking at me as if you have a question, but you just don't want to tell me. Okay.
How many of your brothers chose to fight? How many enlisted and how many?
All enlisted.
All enlisted.
Yeah. By the way, and I'll clarify that by saying this. I don't remember the exact date, but it was sometime about the middle of '42 when enlistments were accepted, but you didn't go in direct. You became part of the draft commitment for your locality. So that on draft day, your number came up because you had enlisted and that many less draftees on the same quota. But they had enlisted as such and were called as such. However, just like myself, I was inducted on the 3rd of May in '43 with about 100 other draftees and about 7 or 8, I don't remember how many, other pilot applicants at that time. How many of those draftees or not were enlisted, I don't know. We didn't get to know that because obviously that was none of our business. I was busy worrying about what I was doing, and when Orson Welles came by, I sort of stuttered. But I can remember him yet. You see, I lived in West Los Angeles, Westwood Village to be exact, which is about 4 or 5 blocks from UCLA College, and about 12 or 15, maybe a little more, from Hollywood. Hollywood Boulevard was the first boulevard south of where I lived. And then Santa Monica Boulevard was the next one. By the way, in case you're wondering how did I get there, I drove a motorcycle from here to there. When I left Pennsylvania to go to California in 1942 or whatever it was. So you see, I was a little bit foolish too. But those were good days and bad days, and they'd come one after the other sometime. And I think it's fair to say, as some have said, that the military is hours and hours of boredom punctuated by moments of sheer terror. And flying is like that too. You can get fairly well shook up. Now, if you're interested, I can tell you some additional things that happened after the war, but I didn't bring them up now because obviously this is World War II. And as I just told you, I stayed in the Air National Guard and operated with it through various things up until I was retired in 1972. After having had 28 years of commissioned service, the law says be a colonel or get out, so they promoted me to colonel one day and threw me out the next because there was no opening for colonels. That happened to about 6 of us who had been in the same period of time, World War II carryovers. We were all eligible for promotion, so we got the promotion, but there was no slots for 6 colonels or any more. So out we go. But I have not regretted my military experience. I flew to Vietnam numerous times. I was in Japan, I was in Germany, France, Italy, patrolled the eastern seacoast, saw Russian submarines from the air, reported them and plotted them. Interesting. Flew to Panama 3 weekends in a row. I'd go to work on a Friday with my bag packed. After work, go to Middletown, get a plane and crew, go to Charleston, South Carolina, pick up a load, wind up in Panama about 7, 8 o'clock in the morning, have a zombie or two and fall asleep, wake up about midnight, start cranking up, be back in Pennsylvania at 4 o'clock in the afternoon on Sunday, and go to work Monday morning. Busy time. I also caught fire a couple times in the air. That can get exciting. I also got upside down a few times without knowing it. Instrument flying is by itself very interesting. Would you be interested? Do we have time to? No, I guess we're running out of time.
About 5 minutes.
Would you be interested? In those days, we didn't have the navigation things you have right now. GPS, radar, sonar, and all that other good stuff. We flew what you call the beam. You remember here anybody saying flying the beam or on the beam? Well, we flew the beam signal. And it's interesting, I need a blackboard to show you that.
Here, I'll move that out of the way.
No, it won't need much space, just a little chalk.
I think there's some chalk on this side. Let me move this.
You have to have a little bit of an understanding of the Morse code, which I'll start with. The Morse code is dot dash to ordinary people, but to users it's dit-da. You don't say dot dash, it's dit-da, dit-da, da-da, dit, and so on, and you read the Morse code. But the thing I want you to understand is this length, and for illustration I'm going to give it 1/5 of a second, is 1/5. The space between, oh I better shorten a little bit, is 1/5. And this is 3/5. Would you believe that adds up to 5/5? Okay, that's the signal length. The next signal is exactly 3/5 away. And we'll stop there. Now then, the letter A is dit, da. The letter N is da, dit. So you see if I put this in here, if I start this and go on over here, in this space, I'll put the da, then it reflects that over here and so on. Now when you melt these together, you get a continuous tone because the two signals exactly intermesh, the A and the N. the other signals we have, but that doesn't matter. Therefore, when you have a radio station, like so, 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 and so, each putting out a signal, the signal, by the way, from a dipole or an erect antenna is just like you drop a ball or a marble into the water. It's continuous circles. Where that circle and this circle meet, you get this complete mesh and have a tone, no signal. So when you have a tone, you're on one of these four legs. By definition, N is always in the northern quadrant. So if you're flying east in the northern quadrant and hit, you can be there or here. By flying a recognition pattern, you'll find out whether it's this one or that one. And of course you can track into the station. And there's a letdown procedure. When you get to your station, over top of the station, because signals nullify, there is no signal. You have the cone of silence, so you know you're over the station. Now you go through the procedure and wind up coming down one of these legs, and in where one of these is at an airdrome, not all of them are. Where you're at an airdrome, on one leg will be the runway. So if you keep the tone, and I've done it a couple times when I needed to, keep the tone in the headset, you're on the right track to the runway. And it gets pretty exciting when you come out underneath the clouds at about 400 or 500 feet at 140 miles an hour and see the runway. It's reassuring, to tell you the truth. I might also say that in one of those cases, I left the Philippines at 6 o'clock at night, and before 7 was in a tropical storm that lasted till 1 o'clock in the morning. When we came into Thailand, let down through sloppy weather, pulled up onto the runway, and again, here's a case where we had 300-foot ceiling and a half-mile visibility, but there was the runway. It rained that hard. When we pulled off the runway, they made us stop because the field was flooded. But it gives you an idea what you can do flying instruments. I hadn't seen anything except my instruments from about 6:30 or 6:45 at night until 1 o'clock in the morning when we broke out the bottom. You can do quite a bit with those little gadgets. Anything else? Okay. I've enjoyed talking to you, enjoyed being here. I hope that you can get an opportunity to see some of the other parts of what World War II was like. I want to thank whoever is responsible for seeing that I have one of these, because I'm sure there'll be names in there that I recognize. I might point out that probably you don't know him, but Dick McBride was the first person that I know of from Millersburg who was killed in World War II. He was in my class in school. They had McBrides